Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining today's session as a part of Research Impact Week. We are so glad to have you all here for today's workshop, Open Access Citation Advantage, Myth, Reality, or Somewhere in Between. Our presenters today are Mitchell Scott, Ben Rawlins, and Julie Volpenhein. During the presentation, feel free to drop your questions in the chat or unmute yourself. And just as a quick reminder, we'll have workshops each day this week at noon. So we hope you'll join us again. But if you can't attend live, we'll be recording these sessions, and these recordings will be sent out afterwards to those who registered. And finally, we'll be sharing a short survey link at the end of today's session. So please take a moment to fill that out, as that will help us improve our future programming for you all. And with that, I'll go ahead and turn it over to our presenters.
Thank you. I'm going to share my screen and make sure that we're all seeing the same thing. Actually, I just sent a request to share. Oh, perfect.
Approved.
All right, are y'all seeing the slides okay?
Yes, now I can see them.
Okay. So yes, thank you all for being here today. Our presentation is Open Access Citation Advantage, Myth, Reality, or Somewhere in Between. So my name is Julie Volpenhein. I'm a health sciences librarian here at the Medical Center Library. And I'll let my co-presenters introduce themselves as well, and then I can get started. Mitchell?
Sure. Hey, everyone. I'm Mitchell Scott, the coordinator of collection strategies here at UK Libraries.
Hello, everyone. I'm Ben Rawlins. I'm the Associate Dean for Outreach, Engagement, and Collections at UK Libraries.
So today we're going to be hitting kind of three main sections of this presentation. I'll be going over a bit of an overview of open access to kind of make sure we're all on the same page before we hear from Ben and Mitchell about some research that they've been doing. So we'll talk about the open access citation advantage here at UK. What are we seeing when we look at UK's data in particular? And then taking it a step further, what does this mean? And then we'll be open for questions then. If you have any really pressing questions in the meantime, feel free to put it in the chat and we can get to it at the moment if it's relevant to a slide that we're on. We're happy to do that. So starting off very basic, what is open access? There are lots of different definitions for open access. You'll also hear us probably refer to it as OA. But this one I have here is open access means free access to scientific information and unrestricted use of electronic data for everyone. So we'll be mostly talking about open access as in articles that come out and are published, but it goes far beyond that. Other examples include open data. So the idea that not just having your article out and your findings and your methods for everyone to see, but the actual data that you gathered as part of your research so that other people can then do research based off of that data as well. Other examples include course materials. So think about all of the same classes being taught across many different universities. So this kind of benefits two different areas here. First, for the instructor sharing materials, but then secondly, we're seeing a big push to use open access materials for students because being a student is expensive. How can we kind of help ease that burden a little bit, but also just make information more equitable across the board? So this is a timeline that is not all-inclusive of OA history. Open access has been a thing long before the term open access was used. And you'll also often hear OA being referred to as a trend, and there certainly are trends within OA for sure that we're seeing. But what I want to show here at this timeline is that open access is a movement overall. So our timeline here begins in the 1990s, where we see the serials crisis happen. So what's happening here is academic institutions, scientific institutions really rely on having access to other academic information and research that's coming out to maintain relevancy, but also just competitiveness. You have to have access to the information to then build off of the information. So that was in the mid-1990s. the publishers realized, oh, these people need this information, and their prices began to be raised like exponentially. Even now, prices are being raised much more than libraries' budgets are being increased. So part of this kind of spurred a huge push in OA. PMC was founded in 2000, so that is one of the largest biomedical databases of freely available articles. It is run by the National Institutes of Health, more specifically the National Library of Medicine. In 2002, we see the Budapest Open Access Initiative, and this was a declaration of academics and people involved in open access saying we need to push for more open access whenever it comes to scientific materials. This is for many reasons. It's more equitable. It's supposed to, the idea is that it pushes scientific progress more quickly. We'll get into that a little bit later as well. And Creative Commons was also founded. I'm going to hold off on that too because I have a slide about that. The next year, we see two other statements or declarations come out on open access publishing. So this is really showing that it's not just, like, oh, like people start using more OA, but it was people saying we need to make this a priority. Also in 2003, we see the Directory of Open Access Journals that's founded. I'll also talk about that in a bit. And then a big jump in 2008, we see NIH public access policy mandated with embargo. So obviously there's stuff happening in between, but I wanted to touch on this particularly because it's kind of timely. So in 2008, this public access policy was created saying, if you're doing research that's funded by us, the National Institutes of Health, and we're funded by the taxpayer, we need to make this information available to everybody because it's the taxpayers who are paying for it. The other idea also here is if more scientific material is out and available for everyone, it's really going to quicken the progress of science. So it was mandated with an embargo, meaning you can publish your work and then you have 1 year to make it freely available to everybody. So this is to kind of help ease the process into having no embargo, because publishers, this was a huge spin on how they do business. They make money from having people pay to get access to these articles. What happens if a lot of these articles are now freely available? And it's timely because in 2024, NIH public access policy began saying no more embargo. This information needs to be available as soon as it's published. So that also has had a huge impact on open access trends. Before we get into open access publishing, we need to make sure that we really understand the traditional publishing format. So in this format, the author submits their article to the journal, they get their work published in that journal, and then the reader obtains access by paying for the article. So very simple, authors don't pay to submit their work, but they also don't retain any rights. So unless you've negotiated in your contract, you no longer own your own work. The publisher owns the work. So the more important a journal becomes, the higher these institutions can raise the subscription fees, because institutions need to have access to their information. If a journal is highly cited all the time and it takes a big place in the scientific conversation, institutions like UK, we want to be a part of that conversation. We want to have access. So the open access publishing kind of turns it on its head a little bit. So the author will write a manuscript, and often they will pay what's called an APC, an article processing charge. From there, the work gets published as open access, and then the reader is able to obtain access to the article for free. So it's kind of a simple explanation. There are different types of open access. The issue here is that publishers were able to find a way to monetize the open access process through these APCs, but oftentimes they are very expensive. Different journals charge different amounts, but this has kind of become a bit of a block for authors sometimes who want to make their work openly available. So I mentioned there are different types of open access. There are more than even what's seen here, but we'll start here. These are the most common: gold, hybrid, green, diamond, and bronze. So gold here means all the articles in a journal are open access. And to get your article into one of these gold level OA journals, you're going to pay an APC. And you can find these in the directory of open access journals. So the directory of open access journals is very cool because a lot of people say, okay, if this publisher just wants me to pay and then they'll publish my work, how can I be sure that, you know, they're a responsible journal and they have standards of who they're letting be published in those journals? The DOAJ has some standards in order for a journal to be indexed in it. So that's a great place to go. It's not a fully all-encompassing directory of all the good OA journals out there, but it is kind of a nice resource. So for hybrid journals, these are when a subscription journal will sometimes allow articles to be published through the open access option. In this model, the publisher's really benefiting, a lot of people think, because the author is paying to publish their work as open access in this journal, but they're still receiving those subscription fees from all the institutions who subscribe to that journal. In the green, that is the self-archiving mode of open access. So in this case, the subscriber still pays. Most of the time, these journals still have a subscription, but you can find the article in something like an institutional repository, somewhere where you can self-archive your work. Now, you can't just go ahead and do this no matter what. You have to make sure that it's allowed in what you sign with the publisher, but this is a great option of open access. Sometimes these options aren't as findable in the institutional repositories, but they're still great. One other thing I'll mention is that you can publish in a green OA manner in different ways. It sometimes pre-prints, so before your article's fully published, or manuscripts, or after the fact as well. The next version is Diamond. I kind of view this as like the utopian version of OA. It's a community-driven, non-commercial model. Nobody pays money. I'm sure someone has to pay money somewhere along the way, but it's not the author and you don't have to pay to subscribe. And you can also find these in the directory of open access journals. And then lastly is Bronze. So Bronze is an open access option chosen by the publisher for different reasons. Sometimes if it's a work that they're like, oh, this is a big article for us, they'll make it open access so anyone can view it. In this case, the publisher pays. However, the thing to know about Bronze options is that unlike these other options, you don't have permission necessarily to use the article however you'd like. You have to go in and check. They're usually on the publisher page. That's how you can kind of tell sometimes. But those are the main types of open access. So now getting into the open access citation advantage. What is this theory? So the more open an article is, the more people can access it, the more authors may be inspired by it, either saying like, oh, this is related to my research, or it might spark a new idea, the more citations it will receive in future articles. So I kind of like to place this as a metaphor into like a physical context. So let's say you go to a craft store and there's a table full of free crafts as you walk in, craft materials, and then, you know, the regular store with everything that you can buy. Maybe you came in for something very particular, so you're buying it. That's awesome. But the idea is probably more people are going to walk out with some of these free craft materials. That's the theory. And hats and scarves or whatever you want to craft, more of those might be made with this free version. That's the theory. Some people think differently, but we'll get into that in a moment. So I do want to just throw out a few options for you. If you also are like, yeah, open access materials is the way forward. We want to progress information more quickly. We want to make information equitable. Here are some ways that you can kind of participate in the OA movement. So you can find open access materials in different ways. One great option is LibKey Nomad, which is offered through UK. It's a browser extension. I love it. And what it will do is it will first let you know if UK has access to it already, but also it will let you know if there's an open access version material available if it's not listed in our catalog. And then you just click it. It's often this download PDF button here, or it will say link to article. Here you can see this is also a free PubMed Central article, so this is open access. There are also open access databases. So I mentioned PubMed Central. Another one is OpenAlex, and those are both ways you can find some OA articles and materials. You can consider publishing your materials as open access yourself. So one thing to note there is that UK has some agreements with certain publishers that include discounts on the APCs. And I believe Annabelle is going to put a link to that page if you're interested in it, to help kind of lower that barrier for you. And then lastly, you can put your work into your institutional repository. So UK's is called uKnowledge here. There's a little logo, and that is another great option. One last thing I wanted to mention before I kind of get into the open access citation advantage debate are these Creative Commons licenses. So these are often used with open access open access materials outside of the bronze category. These are a great way for you to grant permissions to use your work. But one thing to know is that these licenses cannot be revoked. Once you've given it to one of your materials, it's there for life. So the way you can tell what you can do with an item that you're looking at is by these little acronyms here. So if the BY is present, it means credit must be given to the creator if you use it in the future. SA stands for share alike. Adaptations must be shared under the same terms. NC means you can't use this work for non-commercial use, or no, you can only use it for non-commercial use. And then ND means no derivatives or adaptations of the work are permitted. And so this is the open access citation advantage debate. Some people are saying, I'm not certain about this. And the reason why is that some people say that the majority of individuals publishing papers, and therefore contributing to citation counts the most, already work at scholarly institutions who have these subscriptions. So there really isn't going to be that big of a difference. That's what they're saying. And to kind of back this up, sometimes articles have found instances where the open access citation advantage was not true. However, a caveat to that is that these articles, these studies looking at if the open access citation advantage is true or not, often tend to be in very specific subdisciplines. So I'm not even speaking like in the field of medicine, does this exist? I'm talking like in the field of radiology and in the top 100 journals of radiology subjects. Are these papers cited more if they're open access? So the lens that they're looking through is small, and I think they all acknowledge that in the limitation sections of their papers. So we do need larger studies of open access materials, not just in these very specific subdisciplines. And this is not really a part of the debate, but a point of contention sometimes with OA is that there has been a stigma that has been decreasing in recent years that if a journal is offered freely, it must be of worse quality. And this is for many reasons, like going back to the craft store analogy. If you walk in and see a bunch of free craft supplies, there might be a part of you that's like, why are these craft materials not charging me any money if they're of value? I understand that, but oftentimes this doesn't really work for the craft store analogy. So going back to actual open access materials, oftentimes these are being put out for free. COVID's a great example. We needed access to information very quickly to make scientific progress in the area of COVID. Other times, it's just people saying, I value free information for everybody. It is more equitable. It does progress science more quickly. And then also you can think of people who just don't have access to these articles. So under-resourced institutions or citizen scientists, or let's see, journalists, that's a big one. They really should have access to as much information as they need to give us accurate news, but they often don't have access to these databases. So that stigma has been decreasing in recent years, mostly due to COVID and seeing how many great articles came out through the open access method. But now that you've kind of heard both sides a little bit, I want to pass it on to my co-presenters to discuss what they found in their research looking at University of Kentucky, what's happening with our open access articles and how many citations they're receiving.
All right, thanks, Julie. Could you go on to the next slide, please? So for our study, what we started with is we wanted to gather data on specific types of publications here at UA or UK. So we focused on journal articles for UK affiliated authors from 2018 through 2021 using Scopus. So we were able to find 12,540 records of UK publications. So from there, we exported that data from Scopus and we exported author, title, publication year, journal source, citation counts, DOI, OA status, institutional affiliations, correspondence address, and funding details. So once we had that raw data exported from Scopus, we started to modify it and clean the data. So we wrote a Python script to identify the UK authors and add additional details such as department information, what college they were from, and the author position for UK authors. And we also used OpenRefine to clean and merge some of the data. So we used that to clean the data and merge publisher and funding data. And there were cases where our Python script wasn't able to pull some of the departmental college data. So we added that manually so that we had a full data set with all of those details included. And once we had that data in a format that we could work with, we created a structured database in MySQL or MySQL, which is an open source relational database. And then we developed a website using PHP, Bootstrap, and HighCharts. And with these tools, we were able to run the analysis on that data and present the results in a visual and interactive way. Next slide, please. So we were interested to see whether there is an open access citation advantage for publications here at UK within our local context. So with this data, we were able to explore and answer some of the following questions. Is there an OA citation advantage for research outputs by UK affiliated authors? Does the modality of OA matter? For example, is there a difference in citations between gold and hybrid OA? In which UK colleges and departments does OACA exist? What impact, if any, does grant funding have on citations, both just overall and within open access? And we won't cover this in our presentation today, but in our article, we talk about the distinct OACA advantages that might exist between different publishers and the different OA modalities within the different publisher offerings. Next slide, please. So looking at the overall data between 2018 and 2021, authors at UK published a total of 12,540 journal articles, according to Scopus data. So of those, a little over 3,000 or about 24% were published OA. When we look at the citation data overall, there is a pretty clear difference between average citations and OA citations. We see that articles published in OA journals received a little over 29 citations per article. Comparison, the overall average for all articles for UK was just a little under 21. So that means open access articles saw an OACA of about 8.43, or if we want to put that another way, a 40% increase in citation impact for articles compared to the overall average. Next slide, please. So when we break that down by type of open access or OA modality, it gets a little bit more nuanced. So if we look at the breakdown of OA publishing at UK, we see that most of the open access articles published by UK affiliated authors, roughly 80%, were published in gold open access journals, those journals that require the payment of an APC. And the additional 20% were published in hybrid OA journals. So what's interesting is that publishing in Gold OA does not show an OA citation advantage. In fact, the articles published in Gold OA journals show a little bit lower of a citation rate than our overall citation rate at UK. The average for Gold OA is about 20.5 citations per article, which is slightly lower than the overall average, which is 20.94. On the other side, hybrid open access tells a bit of a different story. So articles published in hybrid OA journals were cited an average of 64 times per article, which is more than triple the average for gold and UK overall. So while a lot of our faculty and researchers are publishing OA articles in gold, they receive about 2% fewer citations than the overall average, while hybrid OA articles receive more than 200% more citations. So I think this finding highlights how important it is to not just look at open access as a whole, but to really consider the modality when you're evaluating whether a citation advantage really exists or not. Next slide, please. So we also were interested to see if there were variations by colleges here at UK. So when we look at the citation data by college, we see that there is an open access citation advantage that exists in 12 of the 18 colleges here at UK. But the extent of that advantage varies pretty significantly. So in some cases, if we see here at the data, looking at engineering and pharmacy, citation boost is really negligible. It's less than half of a citation on average. But in contrast, the College of Public Health shows a pretty dramatic difference with an open access citation advantage of more than 80 citations per article. So if we focus on the four colleges that produce the majority of UK's journal article outputs, those are medicine, arts and sciences, cafe, and engineering. Those four colleges also account for about 78% of all OA publishing. Within these colleges, the citation advantage ranges from a very modest 2% increase in engineering to a much stronger 44% increase in A&S. So overall, across all colleges where an OACA exists, the range runs from just over 2% in engineering, like we mentioned, a little bit of a negligible advantage, to 142% increase in the College of Public Health. So while the advantage isn't universal or necessarily consistent in size, it's clear that open access is making a measurable difference across most colleges at UK. Next slide, please. On the flip side, there are a few colleges where an open access citation advantage does not exist, and there's some interesting variations here. So if we take the College of Education as an example, there's not really a measurable citation advantage either way. The difference between the overall citation rate and open access is nearly identical. The average citation is only 0.04 citations higher. Than than OA in general. So in fine arts and design, the picture looks a little different. So in fine arts, no journal articles were published as OA during this period. In design, only 2 articles were published as OA, and when we pulled this data, neither of those articles received any citations. So I think this pattern could reflect, particularly in a few of these colleges, the very nature of scholarship in those fields. So in areas like fine arts, research outputs can often take different forms, such as performances, exhibitions, or creative works other than traditional journal articles. It could be that because journal article publishing is less central in these disciplines, OA publishing might be less common, which helps to explain the lower citation advantage observed in these colleges. I think it's also worth noting that colleges with an open access citation advantage publish a larger share of their research outputs as OA. Roughly 25% of their research outputs are published OA compared to the colleges that don't have a citation advantage, where just a little over 14% of their outputs are published OA. So this can suggest that higher rates of OA publishing may contribute to increased citation impact. So next slide, please. Another area that we were really interested in is to see how grant funding and citations correlated. So when we looked at the research outputs and grant funding, we see that about 2/3 of all UK journal articles that were published between 2018 and 2021, or just over 8,300 articles, were tied to grant funding in some way. So of those, roughly 28% or just over 2,300 articles were published open access. Now, one of the key points is while grant-funded open access articles make up less than a third of all grant-funded research, they do account for 76% of all of the OA publishing by UK authors. In terms of impact, grant-funded research articles overall have a higher citation rate, about 24.8 citations per article, compared to the overall UK average of 20.9. If we look at that from a percentage perspective, that's about an 18% increase in citation impact. Trend is even stronger in open access. So grant-funded open access articles are cited an average of 34 times compared to 29 citations for all OA articles, or a 17% increase. So looking across all this data, the conclusion is relatively clear, that grant-funded research, one, is a significant contributor to a large portion of UK scholarly output. But when those articles are made open access, they receive a pretty significant citation boost, nearly 40% more citations than the overall average. So that's enough with the data. I'm going to turn it over to Mitchell now to tell you what all this means.
Okay, thanks, Ben. So what we took away from this, and we hope you taken away from this, is that OACA is no absolute, and this is no new argument. Librarians at the University of Minnesota conducted a systematic review of OACA research in 2021, and they reported that 47.8% of the articles written on OACA confirmed its existence, 37% found it did not exist, and then almost 24% found it in subsets of their samples or in variables correlated to OACA. And our study falls firmly in this last group. So we think it's interesting to view this from the perspective of one institution and the disciplinary focus of its researchers and authors. But outside of this context, it's interesting to unpack all of the various variables that can be correlated to like OACA variants. So as Ben mentioned, in addition to author, journal, discipline, the main ones are OA modality, like hybrid OA and gold OA, the journal in which the article was published, which can mean things like impact factor, prestige, and readership. And then there's another variable that we didn't include that's called the slow burn of citations, which means that citation impact can't really be seen until the second or third year after an article is published. And then, like Ben said, even within what we saw at UK was the article grant funded, and it's grant funding that we wanted to sort of pull back the curtain on a little bit more at UK. So grant funding proved a major correlation to whether an article would be published OA for us. Like Ben said, 76% of articles were grant funded. In a world of APC driven OA, to us, this means that grant funded articles are more likely to be OA because grant funding can and is often used to pay the APC to make an article OA. So in addition to this study, Ben and I conducted another study where we surveyed recent UK affiliated authors that published OA and asked them specifically about how they pay APCs, how they strategize around paying APCs, how often they write grant funding or APCs into grant funding. And we had 65 responses, and then we held like 8 in-depth interviews with these authors to talk more about sort of their strategies around this. So what we found were that within these surveyed authors, around 57% of OA articles that were grant funded used the grant funding to pay the APC. And we know that grant funding in some instances, like Julie mentioned with the NIH, mandates OA, which can motivate an author to pursue OA and motivate a funder to allow for APCs. However, our research showed that it wasn't the main driving factor, and only 26% of corresponding authors that used grant funding to pay an APC reported an OA funder mandate existed. And then a near equal amount, 22% that received grant funding, were unsure whether the funder required an OA article. And then 52% reported making an article OA despite not being required by a funder. So if 76% of our grant-funded articles are OA, that leaves 24% that don't have grant funding that are OA, which means the author is paying the APC in some other way. And so we wanted to dig into this a little bit more. And so we asked authors, how do you approach APCs without grant funding? And we heard from our UK authors that these APCs are often covered by publisher waivers that they're getting for potential editorial work within the journal, peer review. They can be extended by editors of the journal. Sometimes faculty members or researchers at UK can use startup funds to pay for APCs. Researchers that are affiliated with research centers may have funding to pay APCs. Sometimes APCs could be paid by discretionary funding from UK colleges or departments. And no one that we spoke to paid an APC out of pocket or with personal funds. In terms of trying to use grant funding to pay for the APC, we found that around 70% of the authors we talked to that recently published OA always or most of the time try to write APC costs into the budget of their grants. And we did hear from our authors that, the sort of the nuance behind this, that seeking is not winning. And researchers noted how difficult it is to win funding from a grant, and to two, win a level of funding that can support an APC. Next slide, Julie. So digging into funded articles a little bit more, and Ben talked about this, there were two combined variables that created the greatest OACA, grant funding and hybrid OA. So 76% of OA articles were grant funded. These were 135% more likely to publish in a hybrid journal than unfunded articles. So to us, what this means is that hybrid journals represent many of the publishers' higher impact, more prestigious content. So it's no surprise to us that the highest OACA rests with this portfolio of titles, and that the highest percentage of grant-funded research is published in this portfolio of titles. So hybrid OA allows authors to meet several important criteria in one fell swoop. They can publish in higher profile journals, leading to more impactful and cited works. They can publish in higher profile journals to meet tenure and promotion demands. And then they could publish hybrid OA to meet funder mandates. So to us, the sort of equation behind this is prestigious journals, hybrid OA, plus APC funding to cover, funded by grants equals hybrid OA. One gap in our research was the exclusion of journal impact factor and how this correlated to OACA. And it makes sense as we talk about how this is the portfolio of titles that are the publisher's most prestigious, how journal impact factor would also be correlated into OACA, and that how journals that are published here often receive more citations. We'd be curious to know though how much of a difference OA would create in the same journal for OA articles, the same hybrid journal for OA articles and closed articles. Okay, next slide, Julie. So since this is a librarian-led webinar on OACA in our research, we thought we're give you the library perspective on what this means. So there are these deals between libraries and publishers now that are sweeping the United States after migrating over from Europe, and they're called transformative agreements. And they're also known as read and publish deals. These deals are being pushed by publishers as a way to transition more to open access, and the obvious desire from stakeholders like researchers and funders and librarians for more open access output. These deals ask libraries to continue their subscriptions to journal content from a publisher, so the read side, and then for an additional negotiated cost to have a certain number of APCs waived for institutional affiliated authors, so the published side. And so that means when these deals are signed, that institutional affiliated authors, corresponding authors, would not have to pay an APC for journals that are under this publisher's portfolio. So as I describe these, I'm sure maybe you may be like, wait, you're telling me the library could negotiate a deal to cover all APCs for its authors? And yes, potentially, these deals do exist, but there are all these various caveats and sort of nuances to these. So of the big five publishers, Elsevier, Wiley, Springer, Taylor & Francis, and Sage, which make up around 59% of UK published article content, they offer these deals, but at a significant increase. They're basically asking libraries to pay for all hybrid APCs, maybe slightly discounted. These publishers will only agree to these subscriptions if you move into their all journal package, which we refer to in libraries as their big deal. And so you're paying for all their journal content. UK only has one of these big deals with Sage, but we've had conversations with all five publishers about their TAs, and we estimated our, back of the napkin math that, it would cost an additional $750,000 to $1 million to move into these. The other caveats are they're capped, and so you only get a certain number of APCs per year for your authors. And we all know scholarly publishing, articles are increasing every year, so undoubtedly, our costs would go up, or we would have turnaways for our authors taking advantage of these. And these deals only cover hybrid OA. So as Ben pointed out, 80% of OA is gold at UK, and those are often excluded from these deals. UK has negotiated some of these, all are largely cost neutral, and this is the same link that Annabelle shared in the chat. Okay, next slide, Julie. And so while I got your attention, what if I told you there was a way to OA without an APC, and that making your articles available this way can meet funder mandates, potentially increase OACA, and align with any personal motivations that you have for OA, and you can do it all without an APC. So it's called Green OA, and Julie touched on this. It's basically a poor man's hybrid OA, and that articles are available articles available through Green OA are not open access, so no APC has been paid, and they've usually been submitted to a hybrid journal or a traditional journal, and no APC was made to make it OA. So it's a lot of UK published content. So Green OA allows you to put your author accepted manuscript or your AAM in an institutional repository, a subject repository like PubMed, or another approved repository. So the author accepted manuscript is usually a Microsoft Word version of your article that was submitted and officially accepted for publication. So it's yet to go through any copy editing or formatting. Most publishers enforce an embargo on Green OA. But this is different from being deposited, the date that you can actually deposit it. So Elsevier has an embargo that ranges from like 6 to 36 months. Others range from like 12 to 24 months. Sage allows for immediate Green OA depositing. And you can do all this in UK Knowledge, our institutional repository. And you can actually, UK Knowledge has some controls and mechanisms that allow you to deposit immediately and then set embargo release dates. So you could actually set that embargo to release your article publicly on a certain date. So there's mechanisms with UK Knowledge to allow you to sort of control for those embargoes, and UK Knowledge staff can help you navigate those. Since we're talking Green OA, and Julie touched on this, the big news has been around the new NIH OA mandate. And NIH changed its policy recently and is now asking any NIH-funded research to be OA with zero embargo and immediately deposited upon publication in PubMed. This is largely a Green OA issue, because if an APC has been paid, that article's OA and can immediately go into PubMed. And so it's really those articles that haven't been flipped with an APC that are sort of butting up against this new mandate. Really, authors are sort of stuck between publisher policies and the mandate, because publishers have yet to change any language in their author contracts or within their title or journal restrictions, and they still have these embargoes written in. They still have copyright written in that they retain within their article contracts, and so authors don't really have the ability as they sign these contracts to make their author accepted manuscript immediately available in an institutional repository or in PubMed. It's their contract law supersedes the NIH mandate. And so, and we've also heard that publishers have been unwilling to really move on this, that they've made some statements that they're not going to change this policy, and that there's one way to to create an OA article to meet this mandate, and that's with an APC. So we did want to bring this up. If any of you have any questions about the new NIH mandate and how to deposit without an APC, we're glad to help you with that. And then the library is also aware of resources that you can use to potentially change some of that language in your contract that you're signing with publishers upon acceptance and publication to allow you to retain rights and meet and deposit into PubMed and meet those new NIH mandates. So, and next slide, Julie. That's it for me. We'll answer any questions that you may have.
I had a question, kind of library side of stuff too, a little bit. So I've seen an increase of like those questions regarding NIH public access policy and like how the embargoes work, and like it's really up to like the postdoc or whoever's submitting that journal to try and figure it out. Do we have any, I don't, like I've updated the public access policy, but do we have anything on the LibGuides or anything that like kind of walks? We don't. Okay, that I was just curious because there has been an increase in those type of questions. So that's something maybe I could chat with you, Mitchell, about at some point, and we could update more of the NIH public access policy page.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we haven't updated that yet for the NIH public policy, and there are a lot of resources out there. I know MIT is doing a lot in this space, and then Spark, which is a big international OA organization, has created a lot of resources for authors and clauses that they can insert into their author contract that allow them to retain copyright and to meet those depositing demands of the new NIH mandate. So yeah, we could work some documentation out that should be helpful to everyone.
Okay, that sounds great. I know like CCTS has been having a few people who have done it before talk to people. So we're actually doing I think we're going to be part of a research fair sometime in November. So maybe I'll reach out and we can get that done before the research fair.
Yeah.
Thank you.
We'll give it a little more time for questions, but sorry, I thought I froze for a second. But Annabelle did put the link to the chat, or the link for the survey in the chat. So if you wanted to fill that out and let us know how it was, that would be great. But yeah, we're happy to answer any questions or hear any thoughts.
I actually had a question. So I noticed that you all said that you collected a lot of this data between 2018 and 2021. I was wondering, do you have any future plans to continue collecting data since 2021 or any future directions for this?
Yeah, so I can take that one. So what we've talked about doing is a more expanded study that includes publications, I believe, from 2018 to 2023. That includes like the SEC, the Big Ten Academic Alliance. We've got data from large research organization in Europe called, I think it's called LaRue, I'm not going to even try to remember what the acronym is. But the research organization in Canada as well. So we have a data set right now that has about 3 million articles with that citation data. So we're kind of looking to expand that at some point in the near-ish future.
Awesome. Thank you.
If there are no other questions, thank you all for attending. It's been great being here with you, and hope you continue to check out the rest of this Research Impact Week. There's some more good webinars coming up. So.